Await a motion to approve the minutes of February 9th, 2026.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you to Jane and.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.
You're welcome.
And then we've sent thank you for including all these bills we've sent our position on. Any questions on bills the city has registered in support or opposition of?
Great, and the only reason why I had to include those is the public hearings had already taken place, so we had to email each of the committee members, which was probably more effective anyway, in the long run, but otherwise we just click and say, you know, oppose and support. You can do that only before a public hearing, so that's why that's in there.
Excellent. The only real, so we had discussion on number of bills, ones that we already took opposition to, the mayor's roundtable. They're very similar to our legislative principles because NHMA is also, our principles align with NHMA. The other conversation that we did have, or two other conversations, one was a little deeper on the school care situation. And understanding that from the other towns or the other cities. Rochester's not included in that, but Laconia is. Very similar feelings around the assessments. And then finally, we are going to look to start, so NHMA as it currently is constructed does not have any real position on education funding. And the reason they don't is that cities, the way it's constructed right now, even if we don't actually send the money, half the money is earmarked to go to the other towns that don't have enough property value. So what we're discussing at the next meeting is to create, possibly like a league of cities that could discuss this independently of NHMA, and we can broaden that out. But there's just not an appetite from NHMA to discuss these funding bills, and as they either go through over the next next year or so, ultimately supported or denied by the Supreme Court, those funding bills are going to be more important. So when I have more information or take any suggestions on how that would be constructed, happy to do so.
I think that's great. I think that, we've talked about, and I know like Jane and I have talked about, and people have talked about how sometimes I know as you go to the meetings, you're fighting against these other people that you're in a coalition with because there is huge opposition or huge opposite sides. If we're looking at funding bills and where, it's like, no, you don't want any of that. And so then it does, I think there are some major conflicts gonna be coming up with the funding. So I think that's a great initiative.
Yeah, and NHMA just doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, and it's kind of like a big part of
The benefit of
what they're doing at the State House. So while they've advocated against things on a high level in terms of like with school vouchers, they will not take a position on any funding formulas, and that's going to be important. So those are kind of the highlights. We'll have that initial meeting I think next week, but I will update based on that. I'll probably send an email out. And if it would to be, if it could start with education, there might be other things that as cities we want to see advocated for outside of what towns might want to see advocated for. I could see that extending to housing policies where there's infrastructure that we could be pushing for on the state level that could be returned back to us, that might be in opposition to some of the towns, but be a part of solving the problem when it comes to, how do we build the housing? How do we get enough infrastructure to support that housing when some communities want that and can support that, as cities can, but might not be in the interest of towns to support, even though it would be in their eventual interest, not in their direct pecuniary interest to advocate for positions that would send more money to cities. So that was that.
Great. Well, that's I think that's an effective tool, and I think the Mayor's Roundtable has been effective when they have been able to join and send letters, you know, in opposition or support. So look forward to that as it evolves. And that would lead us to the Association of Counties Legislative Conference. I ended up going to that last month in February. One of the interesting pieces and the most interesting pieces on this whole education issue is that one of the things that was discussed was the pending bill 1804, which would push the administration of school units
Oh, yeah. Do they
on
want
the
that?
counties. Were never consulted. So the county commissioner was on the panel and said, you know, I certainly wasn't consulted, nor do I think that any of the county commissioners were consulted. So at any rate, that bill has been recommended to go to interim study. It should be on the regular calendar moving forward. But I thought that was a very interesting point. There was a lot of discussion about what that would look like and the sense that, you know, it's an attempt to regionalize schools potentially and, you know, cut the administrative costs. One of the very interesting points that was made was what hasn't been tracked, there's been tracked for population reduction, you know, over the years for students, but what really hasn't been quantified is all the additional regulations, both state and federal, that have bloomed, you know, over the last decade and what that requires for administrative costs. So that's the other part of the equation, should this move forward, that it would probably behoove educators to try to at least address, you know, how much additional administrative tasks are now required. The other interesting thing, which you all know obviously, is the windfall of the penalty for forgiveness for delinquent taxes, and that will make the state have a balanced budget this year, but obviously it is a one-time fix for that, so stay tuned.
Do they expect even more tax cheats out there that didn't take advantage this year? I mean, it ended,
It was,
right?
it was expressed as a one-time fix, so I don't know. We'll wait and see what happens next year if there are more, you know, more interest forgiveness and penalty forgiveness to get delinquent taxes paid. And then the next thing is that the New Hampshire, the Municipal Association's Legislative Policy Conference is in September. If we want to submit a legislative principle for NHMA to consider, the deadline for that is April 17th. One of the things which I think the mayor has gone and spoken to NHMA around, and the assistant mayor has gone to that, but we have in the past proposed legislative principles. You know, I think that we did obviously the $2, you know, hotel occupancy tax. And we also have, you know, spoken, meaning we, the city, either the assistant mayor or the mayor, on various issues. So I just raised that for the committee to consider whether or not there's any policy you'd like to submit to NHMA. One of the things I've heard from this committee is NHMA's staunch position against statewide zoning amendments. They clearly have a black line there. And I think where this committee doesn't agree in certain circumstances is some of the housing related bills. So I don't know whether that would be more effectively dealt with in sort of the League of Cities, because I don't know if you're gonna get NHMA and their members to agree to that. But I wonder if there was a way to fashion a policy that might soften that position, or at least give some consideration to some of the housing issues that local municipalities and the whole state is facing. I just throw that out there for a suggestion.
One of the ways that could work would be, well, I don't know if it'd work actually, but if a statewide zoning policy was enacted through and it's unlikely that the state would do this, but it would be a step in this direction, through funding that would allow for those zoning changes to make sure that they're revenue neutral to the municipality engaging in them. So if there was monies attached to try to get more of the carrot approach from the state, but I don't know how we would craft that into a legislative policy.
I think you could amend the existing legislative policy on opposition to statewide zoning amendments, maybe except if the amendments are funded by the state or revenue neutral. That you could propose an amendment to the
Okay.
existing policy if that is what you want to do. And if you wanna do that, we could draft it and then we'd get it to the council and they would approve it and we'd send it along. Otherwise, you could also make an amendment on the floor, that's been done as well, during the conference itself.
Do they advocate for a specific, I'm just trying to think, do they advocate for like a policy that would support a homeowner's exemption on the,
I don't believe they have one.
I don't think they do, but
Yeah.
like would it, like I'm just wondering how that policy would be crafted to allow like special devices for means to separate owner occupied housing from non-owner occupied housing in terms of tax rate.
Well, that was the bill that was defeated.
That was a bill that
yeah.
was like adding for an additional tax
Yeah.
on second homes.
I see.
And so if there was a way that like, if a policy was broad enough that would support for its members. Maybe some thought before. Is this April, when is the meeting? April?
The deadline for the submission of the policy would be April 17th.
Okay.
So, yeah, we could think on that and we
At our
could have
next
a
meeting, yeah.
quick meeting before and get whatever we think on the council agenda, because I believe it has to be approved by the legislative body as a whole.
Oh, right, okay.
I think we did that like 6 years ago. But I think it's worth considering.
Okay.
So, or we could do a very quick, 10, 15-minute meeting to follow up on that. And then the last large discussion are the bills of interest. And so what I think is interesting is the 50 or so that we've tracked from last are gone. Most of them are either ITLs or gone. This is crossover coming soon, so we have another week, so there's gonna be a very busy week this week and a very busy week next week. And so as you can see, we're still tracking. Many are also on the regular calendar to be ITL. So if you look at a lot of the housing bills, for instance, this one, will likely be ITL. This one will likely be ITL. So there didn't seem to be a lot of changes to some of these there didn't seem to be a groundswell focus or push for the housing bills this time around. I think they tried to keep things status quo, and a couple will go forward. The one that we were concerned about was House Bill 1010. What's very interesting is that started out as a repeal of the requirement to put residential in commercially zoned property, but they amended it. So now it's a decent bill, and it just gives some more parameters and guardrails. So this O, I changed it in my notes to a T, to a track, as opposed to.
What was the specific change that they made?
Well, it was repealing
Right, no,
completely. Now it's you shall allow it, so it affirms the requirement. Here, we'll click on it. I'm gonna run out.
Oh, that's right, you
first 3 points are, you know, you shall allow it, which is fine. The quantification now is that the local planning board has to confirm the infrastructure issue. And so, you know, that has some support. I know NHMA is supporting this, I'm sorry, they're opposing this bill because it's a mandate. But it does have some provisions as far as, you know, what is required for the actual construction and infrastructure to support the commercial development.
But this still allows somebody, like a neighboring town, to deny it based on whether or not it was.
If they reach this, you know, if their planning board finds through this criteria that they are unable to house it.
But the
Water, sewer, et
So the
cetera.
original one though had a carve out for light industry. Does that remain in this?
No,
Okay, so that was taken out.
right, but what's flushed, but what it replaced, how it got replaced was, but you have to do a thorough vetting of the infrastructure through your planning board to support this, and they can deny it if there isn't, you know, soil, water, infrastructure.
So-
Water,
What is this going to mean for
road design.
our friends across across Goslings?
As an aside, I did reach out to representatives,
Mandelbaum.
Muse and Mandelbaum, I did not hear back from them. Just so you
neither.
know, I did attempt to reach out. It means that if they don't have the support, you know, the infrastructure support, they can deny construction of residential and commercial. Water, they don't have enough water, anybody would be able to deny it, any town.
Okay.
Sewer, water,
I don't know, I would still oppose this.
okay,
So I think there's already a mechanism to do that. So that's what I'm,
true.
it's
It's the
just
planning board.
duplicating a mechanism that already
Yeah.
exists.
Planning board and TAC would require.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessary, but
But it changes, so does it change? I'm curious if it like, I guess I don't, and if Representative Mandelbaum, who I know represents or has had conversations with Newington on this issue, is their representative, correct? That's.
yes,
I do understand that this is, previously, there wasn't gonna be housing at the Fox Run Mall, specific to the fact that there was a carve out for light industry as a reason to deny housing.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
gone from this.
That's gone.
Mhm.
Okay, and so I don't, and I should know, what, and it's water and sewer, so they have to support.
Yes,
Both.
yep,
And is there a plan, they have to have, how do they come to that plan? Like if
the planning board may deny an application if the planning board determines that, you know, traffic volumes, roads, layouts, sewer,
Okay.
water, wastewater,
okay, so this will be,
the planning board could,
the planning board will, so if the planning board denies it, then they would have their regular, like this would still be subject to go now to, is the not the BTLA, but the Housing
this-
Appeals Board?
yes, yeah, it
The
could
Housing
be
Appeal Board still around?
yes,
Okay,
it
so this would
survived.
be, oh, it survived, okay, so this would then be appealed to the Housing Appeal
Well,
Board?
actually, there's a housing court now, like there's
Oh.
a Superior Court docket now that all of that, a lot of the housing appeals
so
and
this
legislation, so it would likely go to the
This
Superior
would
Court.
go to the Superior Court?
Yep, so they could appeal it if they were denied.
Okay, so the change is they've removed industry
Limited, yep,
and they've put in, or they've reaffirmed,
the redundancy of what.
well, just the public process that
Plans.
exists already. Okay, interesting, I think we should still, I mean, we can track it, oppose it, but there's nothing that doesn't affect Portsmouth in any way, other than they might be able to build in Newington. Correct?
They will, yeah, if they have the appropriate infrastructure, yep.
so Newington on their town ballot, I don't know if this thing's passed or not. They had changes in their town ballot that prohibited multifamily housing in commercial districts in their zoning code, and also created a new industrial zoning district. So I was told they were doing this, they were gonna shift their commercial to industrial so that they didn't have to meet those requirements. The past bill, and I don't know if this passed or if it didn't pass.
On commercially zoned land, yeah, it is limited to it does say commercially zoned land.
Okay, so that's all industrial,
So the question is, it sounds to me like they're beefing up the definition of industrial to distinguish it from commercial.
Right, and their industrial district, on their article on this warrant article says industrial research development, biotech, manufacturing, warehouses, medical clinics, veterinary services, data storage, computing centers are all permissible uses now, industrial.
but
And
not
businesses,
Costco's.
businesses customarily serving industries. So they're really like expanding their definition of what industrial, so that they could expand their industrial district and remove commercial. I don't know if this passed or not, I really don't know, but I was told that they were trying to shift their zoning so they could have, and they rezoned portions of, the ballot also had another article to rezone portions of their office zone to industrial, several of those. So I don't know what passed or what didn't pass.
Double check.
Alright, yeah, be interested.
Yeah.
And anything that's already been, anything that's already been approved or vested could not be changed by whatever this new zoning provision is, which is interesting.
And
To
that,
see what projects were vested when and.
that project had received its approvals, but as commercial only. It had not, didn't have any housing attached to it.
Correct, yeah. Alright.
All right, and so. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. There we are. And there are a few others that are still very interesting to all of us. The one that I think is getting a lot of discussion for the municipal are the NHMA bills. That's been in the news lately. Both of those, no action was taken by the deadline and they both died. This was on Friday, which was very interesting. The other one that asking the committee, there's HB 1064, which is the municipal liability bill. And as you know, we have liability caps of limits of liability. Those have been increased in House Bill 1064. And so we had listed that originally as tracking, and I am wondering if we could then perhaps oppose that, because that obviously higher limitation of liability is more money that a municipality would have to spend. So I did highlight that one in yellow. So is that something that the committee would agree to change to oppose rather than track?
I have no problem with that.
This is the one where, I don't recall if she's still a House rep, but this was the House rep's son who
Yes,
fell on a
yes,
school property.
you're exactly right,
Yes.
yeah.
And then she.
There was a limit,
A limit.
Yeah.
And so this is increasing that limit specifically for this case.
no, for every municipality.
No, sorry, but like would it?
Because of the, yeah.
But it wouldn't apply to this case in
I
retroactive.
doubt it for this one in particular, but I
Retroactive
think,
statute,
yeah, but I wouldn't imagine that it would apply to retrospectively. But certainly moving forward, and that, in this climate of tight budgets, you know, it's concerning that the limits of liability for all municipalities, not just big cities, little towns, would go up, and that's obviously a
And what's the
cost.
amount that they would go up?
It's pretty significant.
Like 100, yeah, quite a bit.
I was just looking,
Yep, so
75 per claimant.
from 325 to 475 per claimant, and 1.425 for any single incident, which there wasn't anything to that effect before. So it would be a significant increase.
How would this affect Primex? Cause would I imagine that
Your
this-
premiums would
would
go
go
up, and
yeah.
the city would have, yeah, I mean, you know, they're our insurer, if they're paying more, we're paying more. So that,
Okay,
And they're at some point only gonna cover so much,
just
and
press back on this one.
as it's written in there, or
Yeah.
as it
well,
exceeds.
last time.
So it's
Exactly.
like, even if Primex says they're only gonna pay $1 million
Okay,
incidents, then we could be
Can oppose.
Okay, so we'll-
live and it's.
I can register
Okay.
to oppose, and then one of the things that I did discuss with Councilor Cook right after the last meeting was Senate Bill 633. We had originally supported that because there was going to be a volunteer surcharge to fund Council on the Arts, but it completely, an amendment completely changed the purpose of that bill, and changed it to requiring anything over $50,000 for grants and donations to be approved by the governor and executive council. It completely hijacked the original intent of the bill, so I changed that on my own without committee consultation to track as opposed to support, because we didn't wanna support something like that. And then, and so then, you know, over course of discussions and getting all sorts of listservs and the calendar, there's a bunch of new bills, you know, three pages of those. Most of those are tracked, just because they're subjects that are important for us to at least know and be aware of how they progress. But we, obviously, the risk pool bills are something. Right after our meeting, Senate Bill 661 was introduced, which was a risk pool bill that would eliminate basically non-assessment risk pools. So that's something that is my understanding from the conversations relative to the other two risk pool bills, which we did support, that the city would oppose Senate Bill 661.
That hasn't made it out of finance
No,
yet.
nope, it has not. And Senator Perkins Coker bill, I believe it's 605, relative to the 36-month ability to repay an assessment, that was killed. But interestingly, 1491, which is the really nice flushed out one that establishes and creates governance and creates an assessment and a non-assessment, that passed unanimously in the House. So that bill is gonna cross over to the Senate. But I think we've become aware that it may have less success in the Senate because there are key senators who I believe are more in line with the which is the one here, 661. So we will keep watch on that, because those are very important, but I wanted to flag that for the committee's attention. And then most everything else is tracking. The other one that I think is significant is the House Bill 1704. That was one that employees would be able to negotiate directly with an employer.
Yeah.
So there would be no unions, it would be
Unions.
just an individual, and that was indefinitely postponed. So that was significant for the committee to be aware of. And then also, the school funding, the ones that are of interest that were debated for 4 hours in committee on Friday. were House Bill 1815 and Senate Bill 659. Those bills basically would restructure what the state's responsibility is for education. And rather than guarantee an adequate education for each student and have the state financially responsible for that adequate education, 1816 changes the language so it'd be a shared cost with the local municipality. And that the not just the total adequacy, but a percentage computed towards adequacy. So basically, that bill also says that education funding is a political, not a legal determination. So it should lie exclusively with the legislator. So it would basically upend completely our historic understanding of the state's responsibility to fund an adequate education. So that is absolutely front page news, and that is something that is going to be continue to be debated and watched very closely. My understanding from the testimony is most of the testimony opposed. However, it passed out of committee 3-2. So we will see. It'll be on a regular calendar, not consent calendars. So it's just something that this committee should be aware, because it is a very interesting set of bills, and the whole education funding issue is continuing to be one to watch.
And it aligns to the state's position with Attorney Formella, his deputy, speaking or asking to reconsider
Yes.
that Supreme
Rand.
Court.
Yep.
Okay.
Basically, it's codifying that, yep. So there is a lot of bills. I'll be happy to answer questions on some of those, but I know you guys have a long day today. And
Any questions?
any questions?
Lisa, we have you.
Hi, Lisa.
Anything you're
Sorry.
tracking on the school
Didn't
side?
No,
recognize
those
you.
last two are real doozy, because I forget what the
Yeah.
bill was last year, where they were specifically naming academic subjects to
Subjects.
remove.
Yes,
And that flamed out, so they softened it hypothetically, so now it's like, you only
You don't
have to,
have to
and the
do-
adequacy is only tied to what they consider essential academics, which is
Yes.
not defined, but you can bet
like
would
it's
become
Arkansas.
defined as like the Pledge of Allegiance
Allegiance.
and like maybe math. So it's a kind of, when you pair it with open enrollment and like the SAU consolidation, is just yet another way to not give us money for schools.
Yep.
It was 400 people there who all opposed. Every single person in that room opposed it. The only two people who spoke for it were the two bill sponsors.
And
So
it's still
business as
passed
usual.
out of committee.
Business as usual.
And it's still passed out of committee.
Well, you know,
So what happened with the
Real
open
representation of the
enrollment
people.
bill?
It still hasn't
still
been
lingering.
resolved,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's still
no.
sitting.
I think
Yeah.
they're taking attendance is what I've heard, and waiting to see
Oh,
if they have the
interesting.
right numbers to have a favorable outcome.
It seems like they're pushing certain bills
That's
further on the
interesting.
slot and then making it so that other voting members aren't there and then calling them.
I was expecting tomorrow, because tomorrow's another superintendent's conference, and they've been trying to time their votes to when there's either the school boards or the superintendents are tied up. So the last floor vote was the same day that the superintendents were out of the state for a
Yes.
conference.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It should be scheduled this week though, shouldn't it? I mean,
Should be.
I mean,
Well, one went straight out of the House, right? Is it?
Yep.
And then that's the concerning one that you wrote the letter on,
Yep.
751, I think,
Yes.
something like that. And there's another open enrollment, a Senate bill, 101, 10 something, and I don't know the status of that, but I don't think that has crossed over, but it would have to cross over by the 20th.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. This week.
So we'll see what happens there, but it's definitely, again, these really are the big story this session, I believe.
Any questions or bills that we have not discussed? We'll have the Secretary of State at the City Council meeting this evening to discuss the school care assessment issue. So we'll prepare some questions in advance of that, but that is They have met with Erin Bockham yesterday, and she shared with me the updated policies of school care that now allow for assessments as of March 4th. So when the assessments were done, they were not allowed, but they are now retroactively, or I don't know if they're retroactively allowed, but
Going
they
forward.
are going forward. They are
Moving
now,
forward,
they match somewhat closely the Senate Bill 661 in terms of times of which they would have to do assessments going forward, 8%, 4%. But look forward to that discussion.
Great.
Great. And I guess another meeting?
Oh, yeah, if we can do it before the deadline for, we'd have to do it, we'd have to have.
When's the deadline to April what?
17.
So-
We'd have to meet
So we,
2 weeks.
so could we do it and then submit it and then pull it if it doesn't pass the city council?
Yeah, I suppose we could withdraw it even on the floor if they've put it
If
in
they
their
bring it in,
packet.
then we
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay,
I mean,
so why don't we just try to do it before the April
20th?
deadline of, or the April deadline of, so it's April what again?
the 20th, they'd need the submission of the policy.
Okay, so if we do it in
Sorry,
a
I
month.
misspoke, the 17th.
17th, okay. So if we do it in a month, set another meeting, that's still before crossover or,
No, crossover is Friday,
oh, Friday, okay, definitely not, all right.
so there'll be more to say when we meet next. We'll have even a smaller list, I'm sure. So what date would the committee like to meet?
Do we like Mondays or do we like Fridays?
Whatever.
I like Mondays, Mondays seem good,
Start it off.
Mondays, okay? And
in 4 weeks.
So we need to meet like the 13th to meet
13th,
before the
13th?
17th, yeah.
We have a council meeting that night.
That's good.
April
Go ahead.
okay, next meeting.
Seems like we've,
8:30 work for everyone?
yeah.
Right.
All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Jane.